So I have two quotes to start us off because I couldn't pick. And this one came into my inbox via a newsletter from Diana Butler Bass. She's a Christian writer and does wonderful things and writes on Substack. Her newsletter is called The Cottage. So she had this preparing for tonight's debate from Parker Palmer. He's a theologian, educator. He's written a lot of really wonderful things and says, when all of our talk about politics is either technical or strategic, to say nothing of partisan and polarizing, we lose or sever the human connections on which empathy, accountability, and democracy itself depend. If we cannot talk about politics in the language of the heart, this ties really well into what we've been talking about. If we cannot be publicly heartbroken, for example, that the wealthiest nation on earth is unable to summon the political will to end childhood hunger at home, how can we create a politics worthy of the human spirit, one that has a chance to serve the common good? That one hit really hard. And then from our book, so this is looking back where we've been. This is from the Hold Hands with Strangers chapter, talking about a ministry of presence from John O'Donohue. Only holiness will call people to listen now. And the work of holiness is not about perfection or niceness. It's about belonging, that sense of being in the presence. And through the quality of that belonging, the mild magnetic of implicating others in the presence. It's not about forging a relationship with a distant God, but about the realization that we are already within God. And I love this belonging and presence. We talk so much about it in these chapters. Right. So looking back, there are four practices of true belonging. Number one, people are hard to hate close up, move in. Strongest sense of true belonging, stayed zoomed in. And when we're committed to getting closer, we're committing to actually experiencing conflict. And there have to be boundaries. So we need to learn those tools for navigating conflict and thinking about conflict resolution. Speak truth to BS. Be civil. And I loved the definition of lying versus BS. Lying is a defiance of the truth, and BS is a wholesale dismissal. And we talked about needing so much more energy to combat BS than we do to a lie. So we don't have to buy into that false dichotomy of either you're with us or against us. That is not a true dichotomy. And civility is claiming and caring for one's identity, needs, and beliefs without degrading someone else's in the process. The third principle or practice is hold hands with strangers. We talked about this last week, and the key to building a true belonging practice in the midst of a spiritual crisis is maintaining our belief in inextricable human connection. And this next point, this one is the one that really got me last week. The more we're willing to, oh no, it's the human I didn't even write it down. It's that human connection. It can't be broken. We can think it's broken, and that's where we get into trouble. But human connection is actually never broken. So the more we're willing to seek out moments of collective joy and show up for experiences of collective pain in real ways, not faceless ways. And she goes into, we didn't touch on this last week, she goes into a whole rant about online communication. And she focuses a lot on social media, Facebook and Instagram. And this is pre-COVID and pre the days of all these Zoom meetings like this. And so I think she might tailor what she was saying. Yes, it is best to be face to face whenever possible, but things have changed, and hopping on a Zoom, seeing a face. So that's why I put real ways, not faceless ways. The more difficult it becomes to deny our human connection. And common enemy intimacy is counterfeit connection and the opposite of true belonging. So When we come together over hating someone, that's common enemy intimacy. And it can happen in simple ways like, oh, you're in the workplace and you and a coworker dislike your boss, you join together. Yes, that can create some intimacy, but unless you have more to go on, it's not going to be enough. And the foundation of courage is vulnerability. So then we get to this week's chapter, strong back, soft front, wild heart. All too often, our so called strength comes from fear, not love. Instead of having a strong back, many of us have a defended front, shielding a weak spine. In other words, we walk around brittle and defensive, trying to conceal our lack of confidence. We strengthen our backs, metaphorically speaking, and develop a spine that's flexible but sturdy. Then we can risk having a front that's soft and open. How can we give and accept care with strong back, soft front compassion, moving past fear into a place of genuine tenderness? I believe it comes about when we can be truly transparent, seeing the world clearly and letting the world see into us. This is a quote at the beginning of the chapter from Rashi Joan Halifax, and it frames everything. I'm going through all the teaching parts super fast tonight. Um, so if you have anything that needs my attention, pop it in the chat because I wanted to have some more conversation. So I'm just going to run through all of the teaching parts. So strong back, spines that are flexible yet sturdy. What I love about this, for those of you who know my history, I am a dancer. That was my first creative language, and I am very embodied because of that history. So I keep wondering, how does this feel in our bodies? So you can even notice posture metaphorically, because I recognize that we don't all have the same embodiment. We don't all have the same relationships with our bodies. Our bodies don't always agree with what we want them to do. So even just metaphorically thinking, if we have a weak back, we're hunched over. And it's kind of this inward, but if we have a strong back and our shoulders are back and down, our back is actually a core muscle. It holds us up and together. We think of abs as our core muscle, but our back muscles are just as much our core muscles. So often a barrier to having a strong back is when we're driven by what other people think. And we can think about it as being kind of weighed down by these expectations. Brené Brown says, perfecting, pleasing, proving, and pretending get in the way of a strong back. And our work is to get to the place where we like ourselves and are concerned when we judge ourselves too harshly or allow others to silence us. The wilderness demands this level of self love and self respect. So, having this strong back is being centered in who we are. And as people of God, that means being centered as God's beloved children and knowing that our identity doesn't come from what the world tells us to be, this perfecting, pleasing, proving, pretending, the fitting in versus belonging. As children of God, knowing that we are beloved, that's where we get our identity. And so that's what can help us with having a strong back. So now the soft front. So this is, to me, this one's harder. Maybe they go in order. I don't know. So armored fronts feel safer. So I'm thinking of an armored front, like put up the guns, let's get ready. I'm here to battle. I'm going to block everything that comes my way. Uh, nothing can get through. And armored fronts feel safer, especially when we're not comfortable with emotions. And we equate vulnerability with weakness. And that's been very much bred into our society. And this is really key, that our experiences of trauma have taught us that vulnerability is actually dangerous. I give you this book at the end. There's sorry, this book called Holy Chaos. There we go. And in it, she actually has, I have to find the right page. There's a chart. Here we go, of how can you kind of determine how can you determine, like, if you're gonna be safe or vulnerable? When is it safe to engage and to risk versus when is it actually not? Because it's not always safe to engage, and you all have talked about that. Past experiences have taught us that. Present experiences teach us that continually. It's not always safe to engage, and so how is it that we decide that? And so this book has a great diagram of that. A soft and open front is not being weak, it's being brave, and it's being that wilderness. And if we go back to the very beginning, that first session, we think about it's the wilderness where these things happen, where the change happens, where the growth happens, where we encounter hard things and learn that we can handle them and that God is always there. And then finally, wild heart. The mark of a wild heart is living out the paradox of love in our lives. It's the ability to be tough and tender, excited and scared, brave and afraid, all in the same moment. And we might find that in some of those holy, holy moments that we're living out this paradox of love, the tough and tender. There's a comment here. Kristen, this past weekend I was working together as a team with some others, and it struck me how much the R, reliability of the braving, is critical to developing trust and not needing to micromanage someone else. But it got her thinking about something else. Are we trying to get to a point where we trust people automatically until they violate a braving principle? Or are we using the braving principles to get to a point of trust? So I think it depends. I think you answer that depending on the person, and we get all sorts of cues that we take in, lots of information of whether we think we can trust them until proven else otherwise, or wait, I know that I need to have this person earn trust from me before I can trust them with other things. So it's a both and. Do you think for everyone, there's one or two critical pieces of the braving framework that have to be present, but others are less important? Yeah, that's a okay. So does everything in that braving framework have to be present for a good relationship? We're not perfect humans. That's an oxymoron. There is no such thing as a perfect human. And I would say the only person who can show all seven of those characteristics, is it seven? Yeah. At once would be Jesus. So it's a matter of, are there enough signs? Uh, you know, and it's also individual. What's most important to you? What are your values? Because we all have different core values, and recognizing whose core values align with yours, and kind of sorting from there. Jean thinks of them as tools. Yeah, so I think it's not necessarily that some can be overlooked. Um, but it's also, I don't know, and I can't remember the name of these things, but there are these diagnostic tools where you'll take tests and see, oh, well, you're really strong here and you're weak there, so here's a good area to work on. And I would say our braving scale is probably the same way for all of us. We might be stronger in some areas and less strong in others, but hopefully there's enough that adds up to tell, okay, well, this is a person that can be trusted, and this person might not be as trustworthy because they score pretty low on all of them, or low in areas that are important to us. So we're working to make sure that everyone gets to experience what brings meaning to life, love, belonging, and joy. And we can't give people what we don't have. We can't fight for what's not in our hearts. And a wild heart is awake to the pain in the world, but does not diminish its own pain. It can beat with gratitude and lean into pure joy without denying the struggle in the world. So, thinking about this, folks who do this work, it's easy to get pulled in because there's so much hard stuff in the world. And we think about people who are out on the front lines and fighting, and maybe they get jaded and lose that joy in their heart. And the reason we're fighting for things is so that people can live these wholehearted lives. And if we aren't living a wholehearted life, we don't have that to give. And so let's see, I left it on the floor. Um, Another book that I have kind of in further reading is The Light Maker's Manifesto. And this is, there's a podcast interview on, I think it's Unlocking Us, Brené Brown's podcast, with the author Karen Walrond, How to Work for Change Without Losing Your Joy. So highly recommend this book as well, or just listening to the podcast. But the book is really great. So here we are at a time to reflect, and I talked super fast so we could have more time to talk together. So a strong back is courage, and a soft front is vulnerability. And how do we value those feelings and emotions? And how are we normalizing discomfort as part of being brave? Along with that, how can we stay awake to the pain in the world and contribute to healing, and at the same time take good care of ourselves? We have a smaller group tonight, as is wont to happen. So I am going to just stop the share and we can have conversation together as a whole. So, what do you all think? I can put the questions in the chat. Let me copy them. Here we go. Whoop. Okay. So I put the questions in the chat because I have a hard time if I can't see the questions. All right, Kristen.
I think maybe I have a different question
Sure.
about being. I'm using this thing, I'm thinking about it, I'm doing life, and I'm like, okay, how does this apply? So sometimes I feel like there are people in our lives where if we're like wandering around using these braving tools and we're showing up this way in the world, we're going to be safe people. And like the experience I had is this person is mad and they're being mad at me, but I have nothing to do with it. I'm just wondering, like, what are your thoughts on? Because I'm like, I can be the soft front for people, and kind of is using the braving principles a tool that is going to help me to not take that personally, because like usually it doesn't have anything to do with me. You know what I mean? I don't know if I'm asking this well.
No,
So.
you are great. The phrase that I say to myself, I have a teenager at home and I love them dearly, but they're a teenager. And you never know what's going to come at you because of other things in life. And there are times that, something comes at you and you're like, wait a second, I feel like reacting to that, but that's not going to be helpful. And so the phrase that comes to mind is from Suzanne Stabile. She is an Enneagram teacher, really brilliant. And she says, and this is in terms of what is the work, but what is mine to do? And I rephrase that as, what is mine to hold? Are they needing me just as a sounding board? In which case I say, I'm holding this while you're getting it out, and then I'm going to let it go because I don't need it within me. So if someone is mad, then you say, okay, what is mine to do in this situation? Is it mine to be a safe place and to say, I'm listening, I want to stay engaged with you, but I can't, number one, answer this right now because so often these questions are unanswerable. And two, I can't get into this argument with you because that's not going to be productive. But I'm happy to listen, I'm happy to hold this, and I'm happy to talk through it in a better time. I don't know if that's helpful or not. It's not always possible. I mean, that's the reality. But even the noticing, and noticing is that first step. And Jeffrey, I'll get to you in just a second. Um, I saw a video recently where someone said, we can't control what our first reaction is, but we can control our second and our third and our fourth. So that's what we're going for, is we have that initial reaction, and to take that step back and say, oh, I had that reaction. That was, you can label it if that's helpful for you. Um, but it's not the reaction that I want to show to the world. What is the reaction that I want to show to the world? All right, Jeffrey, you're muted.
We just forget that. Gee, I thought you'd think everything's automatic, but
No.
the way computers work today. Anyway, the question I would have for anybody, or even for me, because sometimes I find that if I can't trust myself, how do I trust somebody else?
Yeah.
I mean, it's like if you can't love yourself, how can you
Mhm.
love somebody else?
Right.
So that's sort of my question I've been sort of grappling with, because I do trust myself to a certain extent, but then I find sometimes, yeah, maybe I better not, because if I don't know what what I'm talking about or really what I'm doing, what are people going to think of me? And I thought, but if I don't say something, then it's going to be hungering in my chest. So I got to get it out somehow. And how do you do it so that you don't?
Well, I think you've named a lot of what happens in our world right there. Is we're expected to be knowledgeable on dozens and dozens of topics that we just can't possibly be knowledgeable about unless we spend all day researching them. But yet we're thrown into situations where we have to have
uh,
these interactions, and someone is more experienced in this area and someone else is more experienced in that area. And this is where the balance between certainty and curiosity comes in. And anytime that we can reframe something from that certainty category of this is what it is, these are the facts, I'm going to throw in my opinion and state my opinion or my guess or my wondering as a fact, instead of pulling it back and turning it into a question or a curiosity or a wondering, or even just saying, I've spent all my time researching over here. I don't know anything about this topic. I'm going to go either research it some more or come back to you in this conversation. What can you teach me? What are the sources? It's hard to look like we don't know what we're talking about in a situation, because we've gotten to that point in our society where everybody has to know everything about everything, and it's just not possible. So the more we're able to take that step back into curiosity as opposed to certainty, I think the better things are. Paula says in a group she's working in, we came up with the phrase, the power of the pause, the value pausing before you react. Very much, Paula. Thank you for sharing that. I really love that. And that goes back to that reaction of, we're not responsible for that first reaction. We're responsible for that second one and what we show to the world. So thank you. I appreciate that. What other, whether it's answers to the questions in the chat or wonderings or questions you have for the group, what are you guys pondering? How have you all been working with this? I've loved hearing these stories of how you're working with it. Well, I think,
I'll ask another question.
all right. Let's say all of our chatty people aren't on tonight.
I gotta ask questions. I just don't want to hog it. So I've run into a lot of people where it seems like they have a strong need for us all to agree, and I feel like they want to force me into the dichotomy of the if you're not with me, you're against me, when I'm really neither for them or against them. When somebody tries to force you into that dichotomy, like what do I need to say to them to tell them, like, look, asshole, you got to back off because you're just not, like, this is like, you're not helping this right now. I'm not going to be who you want me to be. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Without saying asshole, right?
Fair. I mean, Brené would be right there with you, but yes. So I'm going to open this one up to the group. What do you guys think? You all are pretty pretty wise.
Roxanne has her hand up.
I know, yeah. And Roxanne, you probably have a question to ask. And
kind of goes along with that.
okay, great. Let's go for it.
I'm finding I'm putting too much armor up.
Oh,
I'm not giving that soft front. And I was having a conversation about politics today, which I should not do. And I got very insulted because I believe this way because I'm a Christian.
mm-hmm.
And what do I say to something like that? Well, I'm a Christian too, and I believe this way. So I was very hurt at that time, when that was said. Very, very hurt because they know I'm just a more liberal Christian than they are.
Yeah. Was this with a family member?
Yes. So I knew better. I just asked one question. I knew better when I asked it. And then it got into this. Well, this is why I believe this way. It's because I'm a Christian. Well, maybe it's because I'm an Episcopalian Christian. Maybe I'm not a conservative Christian like you are. Okay, that's all I have to say about it. But it was a hard pill to swallow today.
Well,
and that's why I normally put up my armor, because I don't want to get hurt.
Yeah. And it's recognizing when is it safe to let the armor down, or in what I think it's also helpful to think of, in the truest situation, we would love to take all the armor off, but maybe it can only be a small spot.
Right.
So what small area can we be vulnerable in to hopefully lead to more trust? Now, this is someone you have a relationship with, and so I wonder, is going through that braving framework, would that be helpful together?
Maybe it will be. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I know.
It's yeah.
But finding that common ground. Carrie, what are you wondering about?
Hi. And this, I think, might address Kristen and what Roxanne are talking about. But I've gotten to a place in my life where, as an introvert and an empath, I flee from conflict. And it seems like the last 4 years, all we've had is conflict. Nobody can get along about any subject. And I have become a little bit of a hermit because of that. But I have found that there is a way to show up without having to disagree. I have a niece, and her son just recently identified as trans. So I don't understand that whole thing. I also know that I don't have to understand it to be loving and kind and supportive and encouraging, and that my response and what I think Jesus is calling me to do is to walk alongside my family and just love them. Because it goes back to something I shared a while ago, that, I have this imaginary box with all my questions, a lot about things that people debate about theology. And I'm not a theologian. I can't debate with anybody. I just know what Jesus puts in my heart. And that I have to just turn around and ask questions, you know, or to say to somebody, I don't understand where you're coming from because of my life experiences, but I would like to know more about it.
Hmm.
So if I go into it without wanting to have a fight or making that person know that I'm right, I have to have the humility to admit that I might be wrong and that my job is as a Christian is to shut my mouth and open my ears to what the Holy Spirit has to tell me. And sometimes that means having to say, you know what, I don't know anything about this subject and I can't have a discussion with you because I don't know anything. So sorry, I went off there a little bit.
All right. Thank you. I'm going to go to Jean and then back to Jeffrey since you've
Yeah,
talked.
that's fine. I was going to say do that.
Great. Thanks so much. All right, Jean. She's working to unmute.
Yes, I
There
had
we
to
go.
really work on that one. Um, so I've been thinking as I've been listening to people that this idea of a strong back is really important. That it's important that we know where we stand, that we know what our values are. And in the case, oh, I'm so sorry, I'm not good at names, but the last lady who spoke, in
Carrie.
her case, who cares if you don't have theology behind you? You have your belief, and that's your theology. And so we're asked to articulate what our belief is. What is our basic belief? And that's, I just think that if we have that behind us, that's what we need. That's all we need, is to know what's behind us. I have trouble with what's in front of me. I know what's behind me, but keeping soft, keeping soft when you know what's important to you. When you have values, one of the things about values is that you want to shout about them, you want to hold them up. And so when they're being challenged, it's very hard to be soft and to find that listening center. And I think that's what my previous friend was talking about, was her beauty in her softness, her beauty in being able to just listen, even if it may not be a comfortable listening. And I thought this chapter sort of was a great summary. She brought us into our own personal stance and what will make us strong and vulnerable, and how that yo-yo of life will sort of go on. And I don't want to ramble on, but that's what I'm hearing people say. We all seem to be jumping from one side of ourselves to the other side of ourselves. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
I'm
And
gonna let Mary go before me because I want to hear what she has to say.
thanks.
Because I've
Jeff.
already said something.
All right, thank you. And I will also say that on Unlocking Us, Brené Brown's podcast, she has a podcast episode with this title, and I've listened to it many times. Just, it is so powerful. I'll put the link in the chat in just a moment. All right, Mary, will you share with us?
I will try. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Hey, because I'm driving, so
Oh,
but
thanks
I
for
have a
joining
thought.
us.
Yeah. So I think we started this with the question of, when people say to you, if you're not with us, you're against us. I used to get that, like, with my team at work. Every now and then I'd be walking by at lunch, and they'd be going on, and I never knew what to say. So I am interested in other people's thoughts on that. And I was just thinking, as it's a relatively quiet stretch of road here, it's like, I think what I would say now is, like, there's so much black and white thinking, but in between black and white there's a lot of gray, and that gray is where new ideas and new solutions come out of, and just think about that for a while, or something like that. So I'm really interested in what other people have to say, because like I said, many times I just didn't know what to say, and I just smiled and kept on moving. So that's my comment for tonight.
I appreciate that. Does anyone want to respond to Mary real quickly?
Yeah, I will, because
Okay.
I was just going to say, Mary, you're absolutely perfect for what I was going to say, because sometimes I use the pause button in my head to say, okay, I know what I've got to say, but I want to hear what other people have to say, because they may say something a little different than me. And that I feel I learn from other people. So you don't always have to,
Mm.
chime in. And I used to, years and years ago as a child, I would always, I guess so. And I realized, no, let somebody else, because it gives them a chance to sort of, well, maybe shine, or just sort of get out of their comfort zone and sort of be brave. And I thought, wow, like tonight I've heard some stuff that I thought was, that's interesting. I never thought of that. And rather than just spurting out something, sometimes I feel it's better to just listen and see what the conversation is before you get into it, because it may be going in a place you don't want to go.
Mm.
So
Thank you. We're going to I want to get to our chat, and then Robin will get to you in just a second. And I wanted to say one thing. We saw this last week. The last couple of chapters have been so rich with story. And the parts, I think, from our that you all shared last week that touched you the most from the chapters were the stories that Brené shared. And those were stories of deep vulnerability when she came into conflict, and remembering that these stories matter. And as human beings, we're hardwired for stories. So one way that we can show vulnerability and make connection is through our stories. So even if you are in a tough situation, you've had to take a step back and you're able to go back to that person. If you have a story that illustrates what your point is, and Carrie did that wonderfully with sharing about the family member who has transitioned and saying, I don't understand, but I know that I can love that family member. So having these stories, those are what help to connect us in the vulnerability. All right, so I'm going to move down to back to the chat, because there are a lot of questions in the chat, wondering if showing the softness, our vulnerability to others, is effective at conflict solutions and building trust and confidence, saying I'm with you, or showing powerfulness with kindness for preparing dialogues. So I think that goes back maybe a little bit to what I was saying. We do want to build trust, and showing vulnerability in good ways and can help to build that trust to be able to have that dialogue. What do you do when you reach out to someone with a different viewpoint and they blow you off? I think it depends on the person. If you are in relationship with that person and you feel safe with that person, and being blown off does not create safety, I recognize that. So how do we try to keep forming connection through that? I think it comes down to individuals. But the more we reaching out with those points of connection, I think that's all we can do. Does anyone else have a thought on that? I'm not the expert. I've just read the book like you all have. You can also, if you have thoughts for Janice, you can also put it in the chat. Carrie said, try to remind myself it isn't about me. Yeah, because there's a whole world in all of our heads that we don't know what's happening with each individual person. So it is important to remember that it isn't always about us. Roxanne. Oh, and then were you responding to
Yeah,
Jake?
yeah. Today I knew I shouldn't have said anything, but I did. So maybe I was thinking my spine was stronger, and maybe I could.
And we learn by
But
trying.
I know I can't. So I just have to shut up until the election's over. That's all.
And sometimes that's what we can do. And make connections in other ways, because I know that relationship is really important to you.
Yeah, we have. I mean, we have a really wonderful connection, but it's just so. So I'm in this group. I'm in group therapy because after my husband passed and everything, I think we were all crying today because of stories we heard from each person. And I think we're so vulnerable in there. Maybe I was feeling very like, okay, I'm vulnerable right now. Maybe my I do have a soft side. Maybe I can say something, but it didn't work. So, and she said, is that therapy good for you if you're all crying? I said, yes, tears are very good. And we feel for each other. So that's a group I could really speak my heart.
I'm glad that you have that space. Irma, I told Robin I would get to her first, and then I'll get to you right after she's done.
So maybe this applies to a few things that people have said. I mentioned a couple of weeks ago that I host the annual Ritterhoff Crab Feast in honor of my late grandmother, and I think this year was maybe 58th. I don't know. I inherited it from my father. We had 44 people there, and I'm going to say a good 10 of them vote a very different way than I vote, but I don't know this from asking them. And I have good relations with all 44 people who came. And one of the things that I did, and first of all, if you're hammering on crabs, you're spending a lot of time eating the crabs, and you're not, it takes a long time to eat a crab. So if you're sitting there eating a crab with somebody, you're going to be there with them for a while. So one of my cousins, who is a great believer in conspiracy theories, I said to him, what are you thinking about electric cars these days? I know your brother-in-law has one and my sister has one, and I just kind of wonder, oh my heavens, that launched him. And he went on and on and on, and he had a whole bunch of opinions about something about which I know very little. That worked beautifully. Another cousin, she and I have emailed a bit. I knew that her dog was not doing well. Yeah, the dog unfortunately died, which is really sad. Could give her a big hug for that. And one thing, when my husband and I took in a cat last year, I really didn't know what I was doing with this cat. And the cat, who was a very small kitten, didn't adjust immediately well to our house. And so I reached out to a bunch of relatives that have cats who do not necessarily vote the way I do, to say, yikes, help, I have this cat. You know so much about cats. What can you advise me? And asking questions on something where I acknowledge up front, I do not know what I'm doing. You know a lot more about this than I do. Kind of equalizes.
Yeah, those are wonderful, wonderful stories that illustrate what we've been talking about. Thank you, Robin. All right, Irma. You are still muted.
Okay, better. I had a question about something you said way at the beginning, Joe. You said that you can listen and not hold what that person is saying. I don't understand how you can do that, because as you listen to it, don't you you internalize it one way or another, right? You
Yeah.
can say, oh, I don't care, I'm not going to hold on to that, but it does affect your how you feel,
Yes.
irregardless.
That is very true. That is very, very true. I think what I was trying to say is, if someone is spewing, we'll just be very general here. If someone is spewing a lot of negativity, it is going to affect me, especially if it becomes personal. But I can choose to keep it inside me and stir it up and let it and ruminate and let it fester and grow. Or for me, I often have to go take a walk, or move my body in some way to physically release, but also have that mental, I don't need to hold on to this. Yes, it has impacted me, but I don't need to store that inside of me. Uh, but no, it always impacts you. There's
I had one more thought. I just listening to the lady that just spoke. She says, these are people that don't vote like me. Maybe it would be a good idea to not say who you vote for or who whatever. That might make such a difference in the way we treat each other. Just, I don't know who you vote for. That's just, I don't want to know. Let's be people
right.
again, because I'm sure you all are looking at me, and probably as the only Hispanic in the room, you're probably thinking, oh, I know who she votes for, but I'm not going to tell you, and you really don't. So that's just something I thought about right now, is that we really need to stop using that as a starting point.
Amen. And that's where the shared experiences come into play. So I've told you guys, background in youth ministry, one of my favorite games, and this is actually not one that I did with youth, but with when I worked with college students, is a game called Least Common Denominator. And the way that you play the game is you get in groups of two. I think you start in groups of two and you find the most unique thing that the two of you share. And then you join with another group, so there are four of you, and together you find the most unique thing that the four of you share. So you might start with, oh, well, my favorite food is pizza. Is college students. No, my favorite food is sushi. And then but say, okay, yeah, me too. All right, well, I have been to Indonesia. I haven't, but maybe somebody has. So you just keep working to find these shared experiences. And it's fun because you see where you overlap, you learn about other experiences, and then you just keep trying to get together and together and together and see, how are we the same in these unique ways? So that's a fun thing that I have done with groups before. Maxine shared that in her professional life, she had to keep in the forefront that her responsibility and duty was to the students. She overlooked the concept of vulnerability and maintained focus. It was extremely important not to take things personally, and now that she's retired, and to use that principle and keep in focus the task at hand and whom benefits from the outcome. Yeah, sometimes you do have to just like really be firm where you are, because you can't, I'm sorry. As I said, I'm a little low energy. I got sick over the weekend, so my brain is not keeping up with my mouth at this point in time. Apologies. I have a few last things to share from my PowerPoint as we're getting close to time. So let me head back there and hold on. Oh, Enid shared that we are more alike than not, and I would agree with that. Okay, so we did our reflections. So it's really like, how do we show up in the world? And that's what we've been talking about. and our world needs us to show up and stand up for our beliefs. I just hope we're civil and respectful. When we degrade and diminish our humanity, even in response to being degraded and diminished, we break our own wild hearts, and we can feel it in our guts. I mean, I think we all know that feeling. So, to that point, I see a lot of things on social media, and they may be funny. Um, but when we start to share things like these, and I wanted to be very clear, share on both sides, um, this is not civil discourse. This is not helpful. And when we share these, it doesn't promote our cause. It silos us and keeps up the divide between us. All right. But the path to liberation, and we go all the way back to the beginning. This was all the way back to the beginning. You are only free when you realize you belong no place, that you belong every place and no place at all. The price is high, the reward is great. And we get back to that belonging versus fitting in. And when we first belong to ourselves, then we can belong elsewhere and realize that, yes, we belong, but also we belong in the wilderness. So this is a list. I need to think of the best way, but I'll put it in an email of just a number of books, some that I've mentioned, the camera's backwards, How We Learn to Be Brave by Bishop Marianne Edgar Buddy from the Diocese of Washington. The Places That Scare You. This book gets quoted a lot in a lot of different books. In a lot of these different books that I'm mentioning, this book gets quoted. So that's another good one. The Lightmaker's Manifesto I held up earlier, Holy Chaos. And then I just added Healing the Heart of Democracy by Parker Palmer, which was the very first quote that I shared. That last one starts with .us. It's hard to say. It's a website, starts with .us. This is Overcoming Extreme Division, starts with us. I highly recommend going to that website and signing up for their newsletters. I get their newsletters. I think they come out a couple times a week. And it's just very eye-opening. It really uses a lot of this work. It's really tied into what's happening in the United States right now, especially with the election, but really all of the divides that happen in our lives. So it's a great, great starting place. They have a lot of great articles, all of that. And let's see here. I said we are more alike than not. Refugee friends, I welcome them with open mind and open heart. Thank you, Amy Lou. Jean, if you email digital ministry .org. All right. Before I think my next slide is our closing prayer. Before I get to our closing prayer, does anyone have any last words that they want to share or ask or just hold up for the group? Irma.
Just want to say thank you, Joe. This has been a fantastic class. And I want to thank you for everything you do. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We'll do more book studies. Our next class is very different, but also in the same line. It's a class on compassion, and this is looking at the spirituality side. So we did a lot of digging into books and texts, and so we'll be looking at Henri Nouwen and other theologians, and really looking at how we work within ourselves to show compassion and to share that compassion out in the world at a time when we really need it. So it's all tied together, just looking at it from a different angle. So I hope you'll join for the compassion class. It's in the emails you get from the Cathedral. You can find it on the Cathedral website. But I wrote a prayer for us tonight, so I'd love to close us in prayer. It's kind of long. I apologize now, but these are the words that God gave me. So we'll see. Loving and gracious God, you call every person who walks your earth beloved. The ones we like, beloved. The ones we don't like, beloved. The ones we really can't stand, beloved. Even ourselves, you call each one of us beloved. Help us, God, because it is not always easy to take off the lenses that show every little crack and division between ourselves and others. Help us recognize that to you there is no other. There is only my child and my child and my child. Help us, God, when we get in our own way and forget the ways that Jesus taught us, to love one another, to talk to one another, to care for one another, and to listen to one another, because these are the actions that bring us back together. Help us, God, to show up when life is so beautiful, our very breath is taken in awe, and to show up when life is so hard that we can barely breathe. In those moments of collective awe and pain, send your Holy Spirit, your very breath, to fill us and renew us and cleanse us and unite us, and remind us that we're really not so different as we like to think. Help us, God, to strengthen ourselves so that we may know our own worth, to be vulnerable when it's safe to do so, even if it's scary, and to lead with our hearts into the places you call us, the places where we find the hurting and broken of the world. Help us, God, when you call us into the wilderness, because that is where the hard and beautiful things happen. It is where change happens amid the wild, the lost, the forgotten. You call us into the wilderness because that is where your voice can be heard most clearly, without the distractions of life, without the comfort of home, without the security we pretend we have. Loving and gracious God, we offer ourselves to you, our flaws and our vulnerability, our courage and our heartache, all that we are, in service of what you would have us to do. Amen. Oh, peace be with you, friends. Thank you for being here tonight.
Amen.
Blessings.